Welcome to my video. This is Algebra 2. This is lesson 65, quadratic formula. I love this lesson. I like a lot of things in math, but this is one of my favorite parts because it's all about following the formula. That's all you have to do. Once you understand the formula, you can understand it all. So I'm going to zoom in so you can probably screenshot it. Oh man, I can't zoom in videos. Sorry, my hands are dirty from the board. Anyways, just try to zoom in, try to screenshot it on your own. I don't understand what kind of phone we have, so if you could do that, that's fine with me. Here we have the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the a's, the b's, the c's, they all come from the quadratic formula, or the quadratic equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c. When we get into factoring, like really advanced factoring, you'll notice that there's a lot of different numbers, a lot of different things, and it can get very complicated. So if you're not a fan of factoring the trial and error way, there's always this way you can always go back to. Even with just the basic, like x squared plus 3x plus 7, you can use this equation to solve for any of these. Again, there's so many different ways to solve for math. In this case, quadratic formula, you can do that instead of factoring. Here, we have example 1. We have 5x squared plus 34x minus 7. 5 is our A, 34. I always circle the sign in front of it because that's very important. A lot of time people miss the signs. The signs are what really gets to you. Plus 34 is B, negative 7 is C. We're going to follow this equation and plug it in. So negative B, so it's going to be negative 34 plus or minus the square root. Have my square root sign. Don't forget to put it. A lot of times for distance formula, people would always forget it after the second and third step. I include it for every step so you can see everything here. Plus or minus square root of b squared, so that's again 34, minus 4 times a times c. Minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is negative 7. Divided by 2 times a. A is your 5. So again, maybe screenshot this equation here. You can use this for your worksheet and for your test. You have the book in front of you. You don't even have to screenshot it, honestly. Here, we'll go step by step. We have this whole equation. What do you do? How do you solve for it? How do you simplify it? Always work with under the radical first. Here in radical, 34 squared, 1,156. Subtracted by the product of these three numbers. So 4 times a times c, 4 times 5 times negative 7, I got negative 140. So it's b squared minus, so keep in mind you have the minus sign, minus whatever the product is there, and that's what I have there. Or you can do negative 4 times 5 times negative 7, you'll end up with positive 140. You can do that because it means the same thing. Here, next step, I simplify under the radical again, I get 1,296. So here, negative 34 plus or minus the square root of 1,296 divided by 10. I always check in my calculator if 1,296 is a perfect square. If it gives you decimals, you have to simplify using the radical way, which we've done before. But in this case here, this is a perfect number. This becomes 36. Now it's negative 34 plus or minus 36 over 10. Whenever you have a fraction, you have two terms on the top. You have negative 34 and you have 36. Whenever you have two terms on the top, make sure you include that denominator to each term. But in this case, we're dealing all with numbers. This will pertain more to the radicals, as you'll see in the next example. Here, plus or minus, that means you have two answers. So plus or minus always means two answers. This pen doesn't work anymore. So now, our first answer, positive. So negative 34 plus 36 over 10. Simplify that, negative 34 plus 36, 2 over 10. Simplify again, 1 over 5. Next one, we're going to subtract. So the plus, we did here the positive, we did the negative now. Negative 34 minus 36, negative 70. Over 10, we have a number of negative 7. Next example, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated, is the complex fraction. Here it says, for example 2, solve the equation, write the solution as complex numbers in standard form. So that's standard form, a plus bi. The I is second. Here we have 3x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. A, 3, B, 5, C, 4. They're all positive. I always circle the signs, including with the numbers. This just helps you to identify, to just place it in the right place. Here, negative b. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b minus, can you see here? Yep. B minus 4ac. So after a while, like for that formula, I have that formula memorized because I've used it so much. For you, again, look at the book. So b squared is 5 squared minus 4ac. 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 4. Over 2 times a, 2a, which is 2 times 3. Next step, I simplify under the radical. So I get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. That's the squared minus 48 over 6. And then I have, simplify that even more, negative 5 plus or minus negative 23 over 6. Keep in mind, when you have negative radicals like that, we have a new word that we learned, a new term that we use, which is the imaginary number. So we have negative 23. So another way you can write that is separate the negative sign, so the square root of negative 1, and you'll have negative 23. You'll have the square root of 23i. You can place it in the front. You'll see later they want it second because according to this here, it's a plus bi. The I is going to be the second number. It's not going to be the first one, the first number in front. So here, I'm going to have it how the book has it. It's going to be the 23i. So now it becomes a positive because before we used to have negatives being a big no because that's an error in the calculator. In this case, it's not. Here we have negative 5 plus or minus 23. Actually, I'm going to write this here. Negative 5 plus or minus 23, I'm going to put the I next to it, over 6. Now I have to separate it because plus or minus, 2 answers. Negative 5 over 6, that denominator is going to apply to both terms on the top. So there are 2 terms in the numerator, so I'm going to apply the 6 to both those terms. I'm going to kind of separate them. So negative 5 over 6 plus 23, the square root of 23 over 6i. So the I is going to be second because according to that formula, they want it second. So do not put it in the front. And then my negative answer. So it's negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 23i over 6. Negative 5 over 6 minus the square root of 23 over 6i. So it's a plus or minus. Another way to write it is this way here. But if you're missing one of the signs, again, I don't care which way you write it. In your quizzes, you're going to have both options because they don't have it in the little keyboard. Now moving on, B. Here we have fractions. Whenever you have fractions with quadratic equations, you want to get rid of the fractions. So to get rid of them, you find the least common multiple. So we have 1 there, we have 1/2, 1/8, and the 0 there. So the 2 fractions I have is 1/2 and 1/8. The least common multiple for those 2 is actually 8. I'm going to multiply the whole equation by 8. So 8 times x squared, 8x squared. 8 times negative 1/2, negative 4. 8 times 1/8, that's 1 there. And then 8 times 0 is 0, so include that number as well. These equations, you always make sure you have it equal to 0. So if this whole equation is equal to 7, you're going to move the 7 over and you're going to include it in the constant. It has to be set equal to 0, or it has to be by itself in order for you to use the quadratic equation up there. Here, we have our A, 8, B, negative 4, C is 1. We use a quadratic formula. I have it here. I placed it here. I go step by step. You can stop the video. You can zoom into it to see what I did. I always do the work ahead of time. Saves more time to make these videos. Here we have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Negative b, which is negative 4. So it's a negative 4. That means your 4 is going to end up positive. That's why I say be careful of the signs. That's like the #1 issue that people have with it. It's not filling it in. It's just the numbers and the signs that really mess people up. Here, negative b, negative 4, plus or minus negative 4 squared, that's your b, minus 4ac, 4 times 8 times 1 over 2a, 2 times 8. Here, you simplify. This becomes a positive. 16 squared. Remember, it's on negative 16. It's negative 4 squared, which is negative 4 times negative 4. 16 minus 32 over 16. Then you simplify even more. 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 over 6. If I were to, drop my cap here. If I were to factor my square root of 16 here, I can factor out the negative 1 because now I got the square root of 16 and I have the square root of negative 1. Square root of 16 is 4, a whole number 4. And the square root of negative 1 gives you that imaginary number I. So that's why I have here 4 is plus or minus 4 plus or minus 4I over 16. Now we have to find our two answers. This is not simplified. You can look at this and say, it looks like you can simplify it. Yes, you can simplify it. The 16, you're going to apply it to both terms, the 4 and the 4I. So we're going to deal with the positive. So 4 over 16 plus 4I over 16. 4 over 16 turns into 1/4. 4 over 16, 4I over 16 turns into 1/4 I. And that's your answer for the first one. Next one, negative. So you're going to subtract them. 4 over 16 minus 4I over 16 equals 1/4 plus 1. Actually, it's minus. 1/4 minus 1/4 I. If you have any questions, make sure to use the drop-down box. Again, I will have homework for the week. The week before you had worksheets. This week, I'm going to do book work. Next week, if we're continuing this online education classes, I'll have more worksheets, but every other week I'm going to transition. This week we're going to deal with all about the lesson practice. So nothing too advanced, just lesson practices. When you come back to school, I should have a stack this big. If you're missing half of it, I will find you and I will let your parents know that you weren't doing anything during the whole break. So now we're going to go ahead and end this video. If you have any questions, again, I do the voice memo. I can even show you how to do it. You can take a picture and say, I don't understand this. I am here to help you out. If you guys need anything, just let me know.